Hello everyone, my name is Erin and I'm the editorial representative and the public relations officer of the Southern branch of the Irish Patchwork Society. We recently debuted the final block of our 2015-2016 Block of the Month project. One of our members found this presentation really helpful, and so she suggested that I post this to the internet, so I'm going to attempt to recreate the presentation that I gave during our meeting in January. So hopefully this can be helpful for the members that not only weren't able to come to the meeting, but other members of the Irish Patchwork Society as well. So let's get started. For January 2016, our block of the month was the Wheel of Fortune block. I've also seen this referred to as the Road to Fortune block. It's a block that's made using foundation paper piecing. And so that's the new skill that we're going to learn this month. What exactly is foundation paper piecing? Well, it's a method used to stabilize pieces of fabric that are stitched together, and it's often used to create precise blocks with sharp points and perfectly matched intersections. I have put in some quilts that I thought were really good examples of quilts that were made using foundation paper piecing. So the first one, this is by Fresh Lemons Quilts, and you can see the web address on the screen there, and it's called Prism. I don't have access to my mouse that you will be able to see, I believe, so the block is a square block, and it's got the white diagonal. There's two separate blocks that create this quilt. It's got the white line down the center, and then two separate grays, and then the colors are in the two opposite corners. So using those two blocks creates this beautiful quilt. One thing about foundation paper piecing is that you can use it to create pretty much any object that you can see. For example, this one is a butterfly. It's from Lily Ella Stitchery, and you can see the web address there, and it's called Take Wing. I've seen foundation paper piecing blocks arrange that under the themes of like Harry Potter, so it will be the broomstick or his glasses or the lightning bolt. I've also seen Doctor Who foundation paper piecing projects. Basically, the possibilities are endless. The next example I thought was a really cool quilt block. It's called the Fractal Quilt Block, and it's by Patty Slinger at beckyandlundy.com. One example that I saw from this block recently is that she created like a Christmas wreath using different greens, where you can see the colors here. And with Christmas just passing, I thought this was this would be a really fun example if you want to get ahead and make some Christmas decorations for next year. And the final example that I thought was really cool was by Violet Craft, and this is her Jungle Abstractions quilt, The Lion. She also has created another quilt that uses a giraffe, and this is quite a complex quilt made using paper piecing. However, don't feel like this is out of your skill set. Once you kind of get the basics of foundation paper piecing, you can create practically anything. So just getting the basics, making this quilt block from our block of the month, I think once you do that, you would be able to make a project like this. So what supplies do you need for foundation paper piecing? Well, you need paper, you need templates, you need a sewing machine, an iron and ironing surface, and a clear ruler and rotary cutter. I had a hard time saying that at the meeting as well. So what kind of paper would you need to use with foundation paper piecing? There's a few options available out there. They include lightweight vellum, they include foundation paper, and they include regular copy paper. So if you're using vellum, the plus side is that it's easy to see through for fabric placement. It's translucent, so you won't be able to read like regular text through it. You would probably be able to read like a really large font, but you wouldn't be able to read just like a normal 10 or 12 point font. but you'll be able to see the different colors through it. And it's really easy to tear away after you stitch through it. And it's just lightweight and really easy to sew through. One of the downsides of using vellum is that it's expensive. One of the web searches that I did found that it was $12 for 30 sheets. So that's a little expensive for my blood. So there's a few other options. There's a branded foundation paper. A well-known brand is Carol Doak's foundation paper. I personally have never used this, but I believe it's more like a newsprint, so like the kind of paper that a newspaper is made out of. It can go through your home printer. It is lightweight, so it's easy to sew through and tear. It's absorbent, so when you put it through your printer, it absorbs that ink very well, and it's non-coated, so fabric won't slip. It's a little more affordable. It's 100 sheets for about $13. But the final and what I personally use is just regular copy paper. And the upside to this is that it's readily available, it's inexpensive, it's easy to tear as long as your stitch length is small, and you probably already have some. I know I do. So, you're using this paper, you're going to print your paper piecing templates out onto it. These are always provided in your patterns. They include the seam allowances. So you'll see in this example here on the screen, there are two triangles, and there's a more bolder line where the diagonal lines in the triangle go to. And then there's more of a lighter weight line around the outside of that triangle. That lighter weight line is the seam allowances. So what you're going to end up with is that inner triangle. The paper piecing templates may have 1, 2, or more parts to form your block that you need. And you need to print as many copies of the template as your pattern tells you to. So for example, our pattern requires 4 copies, so you'll have 8 triangles altogether. So how do you set up your sewing machine? Well, you need to use a foot with high visibility because you're going to want to see that line that you that you sew on. And you're going to need to set a shorter stitch length. I found 1.5 millimeter is just the perfect stitch length. You can still tear out your stitches if you need to, and it perforates the paper enough that it will be easy to rip. So your golden rules for paper piecing is that all fabric is placed on the unprinted side of the paper. The only fabric placed right side up on the unprinted side of the paper is that first piece of fabric for each template. All subsequent fabric is placed wrong side up. If you're using solids for your block, it really doesn't matter. You can put either side up, but if you're using a print, this is very important to know. And you want to always use a light source to check your fabric placement. You want to hold your template up to that light source. And if you want to double check how your fabric is, you want to hold the fabric at the seam line you're about to sew on and flip it over to make sure you're going to cover the amount of the template. And this is going to be a little bit clearer as we go through the presentation. You'll see some examples. And then when you're done sewing, you set every seam with a hot dry iron after you trim the excess seam allowance. You do not want to use steam because steam and paper is just kind of bad news. So now we're going to go through the step-by-step instructions. Again, this is the Wheel of Fortune block. I've also seen it referred to as the Road to Fortune block, and I'm sure there's a few other names that I haven't found. You can download the template at www.ipsquirk.com, and be sure that small square down in the right lower hand corner measures to be 1 inch. This is going to ensure that you get a unfinished 12.5 inch block, which will be a finished 12-inch block. And when you get to our website, ipsquirk.com, there's going to be a banner at the top, and you'll see the 2015 block of the month there. I haven't yet created a blog post about the block. I probably will after I finish recording this. So I can include this video presentation in the blog post for the block of the month. So the directions for cutting, you're going to create 4 piles of fabric. Each one of these piles of fabric corresponds to the number section that you're going to cover with that fabric. So each of the templates, one is the A template and one is a B template, and each of those sections in the A or B template is numbered. So your pile 1 is going to correspond with A1 or B1. Your pile 2 is going to correspond with A2 or B2. Your pile 3 is going to correspond with A3 or B3. And your pile 4 is going to correspond with A4 or B4. So for the blue, in my example, I used blue fabric for my pile 1, and that's going to be 8 pieces that are 2.5 by 5.5 inches. For pile 2, I used white fabric, and you're going to create 8 pieces that are 3 3/4 inches by 4.5 inches. Your pile 3 is going to be white fabric, and that's going to be 8 pieces of 4 by 5.5 inches. And your pile 4 is going to be 8 pieces of 3.5 inch squares. And that pile 4 is the one that I use the print that ends up being that sort of pinwheel in the center. So the first thing you're going to do is prepare your templates. You're going to want to cut them apart, but there's no need to be exact at this stage. What I end up doing is with my 4 copies, I just take those 4 pieces of paper and I kind of stack them and line them up fairly accurately, the 4 pieces all together. And then I cut the bottom off because it's bigger than the piece of paper is bigger than the templates. So I just cut the excess paper on the bottom off, and then I just cut a line in between the 2 templates. You're going to trim the templates down a little bit later after you sew all your fabric on. So you're going to place your first piece of fabric, and you're going to want to make sure that it covers up the entire section that it's meant to cover. And you'll see in this photograph, I'm using a desk lamp as a light source because obviously the day that that it was, you'll see that it's quite yucky outside. So just find a light source. I've also seen, I've heard of people using an iPad with a white screen, or you can use a light table or a window. So you're going to want to make sure that blue piece, or whatever color you've chose to be that ring around it, you're going to want to make sure that the fabric covers that entire spot as well as the seam allowances. So right outside the darker line, you'll see that fainter line on the right and the left hand sides that show where you need to, that show the seam allowances of the template. You're going to want to make sure that you have enough fabric in the seam allowances. Then you're going to place your second piece of fabric. If you are not very experienced at foundation paper piecing, you might find that pinning that first piece of fabric down is helpful, or you can use a washable glue stick. I've heard that the school glue sticks are really handy with this because it washes away from the fabric. So you're going to want to secure that first piece of fabric. I'm pretty comfortable with foundation paper piecing, so I just held it with my hands. I'm pretty confident. I don't feel like I need to secure it. So you're going to place that second piece of fabric, and my second piece of fabric is white, and it's going to cover that A2 section. You're going to want to take the time to double check that it will cover the entire section before sewing. In this photograph, I took this photograph before I realized that the fabric wouldn't cover the section. I didn't take the time to double check that it would cover, so make sure you take the time, because otherwise you're going to have to rip it out and restart. And ripping out stitches that are 1.5 millimeters are not very fun. So once you double check, you're going to sew on the line, and at the beginning and end of your seam, you're going to backstitch for ease of removing the paper. And this is supposed to be a video, so I'm going to see if I can get it to play by clicking on it. Yes. So you'll see that we start out by going a few stitches forward and then backstitching and then continuing on, and you just make sure that you sew on that line between the A1 and the B1, or the A1 and the A2, sections, or the B1 and B2 sections. So you just sew right on the line that you see. And again, take the extra time to ensure your placement, because you'll see here that fabric doesn't quite cover the tip of that triangle. And what I had to do was rip and resew the fabrics. Because this was the first piece of fabric on my or the first two pieces of fabric on my template, I ripped off the template and printed out a new one. But if you've done more than one piece of fabric, you can rip, secure with some tape on that sewn section of the template where the holes are from the needle, and resew. Once you ensure you have proper placement, you're going to trim your seam to 1/4 inch, and you can do this using your ruler and rotary cutter, which is what I personally prefer, or you can use just some hand scissors and cut that. You don't have to be exactly precise with this part. You just want to make sure that there's not going to be any shadowing of any darker fabric. And if you're 1/4 or a hair over 1/4 inch, it doesn't really matter. So you're going to continue the process of placing the fabric, flipping it up to make sure it's going to fit, and sewing until your template appears like this. And it kind of looks like a hot mess right now, but you'll see that it's going to look pretty good. Once you do that, you're going to flip your template over, and you're going to put your clear acrylic ruler on your paper, and you're going to trim away all the excess paper and fabric at this point. You're going to put your ruler on that bold inner triangle line and cut away anything that's over 1/4 inch away. You're going to repeat this process of placing fabrics, ensuring fit, sewing, flipping, pressing, and trimming for all 8 templates. You're going to create 4 A templates and 4 B templates. You're going to take 1 A template and 1 B template and sew those together in pairs. And what I did before I started sewing these together in pairs is that I set out all 8 of my templates in what the block is going to look like, just to make sure that the triangles that I have that are in the center didn't have similar colors next to each other. So I kind of decided what A and what B would go together first. And so you sew together in the pairs. And once you sew these together in pairs, I remove just the paper from the seam allowance, and then I press my seams open. And you're going to repeat this process a total of 4 times, so you create 4 quadrants. Once you have those 4 quadrants, you're going to sew 2 of them together into rows. And then you're going to, again, remove the paper only from the seam allowances and press those seams open. And then once you do that, you're going to sew your rows together. And then you're going to remove the paper only from the seam allowance. And it's best to keep the paper in the block until it is sewn to another block or sashing. This is because the block currently has bias edges exposed that may stretch if the paper is removed too early, and you want to make sure that your block doesn't get stretched out. So that's the end of the instruction for the block. You want to check out our Pinterest board. I've been doing this for every month of our Block of the Month project. The block that we pick for each month, I've created a board for. I found quilts or tutorials or videos or alternate directions or, practically anything that has to do with that block that is picked. So if you go to the website here, you can find our Pinterest board. And then coming in February, we have our final quilt reveal and setting suggestions. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. Again, my name is Erin, and I am the public relations officer and the editorial representative for the Southern Branch of the Irish Patchwork Society. So you can email us at corkips@gmail.com. And again, our website is ipscork.com. And I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and please give me any comments or suggestions that you have. So I should be posting this to our YouTube as soon as it's done processing. And yeah, and I'll create the block of the month blog post as well. So again, thank you, and I hope you all have a great day. Happy sewing. Bye.